Animal Farm, Chapter 4. By the late summer, the news of what had happened on Animal Farm had spread across half the country. Every day, Snowball and Napoleon sent out flights of pigeons whose instructions were to mingle with the animals on neighboring farms, tell them the story of the rebellion, and teach them the tune of Beasts of England. Most of this time, Mr. Jones had spent sitting in the tap room of the Red Lion at Willingdon, complaining to anyone who would listen of the monstrous injustice he had suffered in being turned out of his property by a pack of good for nothing animals. So basically, he's sitting in the tap room, which is the adult beverage room of the local pub in the town of Willingdon, complaining. The other farmers sympathized in principle, but they did not at first give him much help. At heart, each of them was secretly wondering whether he could not somehow turn Jones's misfortune to his own advantage. They wanted to see if maybe they could somehow profit from the animal farm. It was lucky that the two owners of the two farms, which adjoined Animal Farm, were on permanently bad terms. So these are the neighborhood farms, one maybe on the left, one maybe on the right. One of them, which was named Foxwood, was a large, neglected, old-fashioned farm, much overgrown by woodland, with all its pastures worn out and its hedges in a disgraceful condition. Its owner, Mr. Pilkington, was an easy-going gentleman farmer. That means he was wealthy despite how his farm was not doing well. He was a gentleman farmer who spent most of his time in fishing or hunting according to the season. The other farm, which was called Pinchfield, was smaller and better kept, so it was kept in better condition. Its owner was Mr. Frederick, a tough, shrewd man, perpetually involved in lawsuits and with a name for driving hard bargains. So basically, he was a tough but a smart man, perpetually always, all the time involved in lawsuits and with a name for driving hard bargains, which kind of means that he really stuck to getting the best deal possible, even if it didn't help anybody else out. These two disliked each other so much that it was difficult for them to come to any agreement, even in defense of their own interests. So when I think of the adjacent or adjoining farms, I like to make sure that I understand what the name of the farm is and what the name of its owner is. And so I made this little chart here just so that you could make sure to get them straight in your mind because it's F and P and F. I know I can easily get confused, so I wanted to create this for you. If it would help, you might want to pause the video and jot this down into your notes. These farmers can become very important figures later in the text. Nevertheless, they were both thoroughly frightened by the rebellion on Animal Farm and very anxious to prevent their own animals from learning too much about it. At first, they pretended to laugh, to scorn the idea of animals managing a farm for themselves. The whole thing would be over in a fortnight, they said. That's 2 weeks. I know, just like the game, but not really. They put it about that the animals of the Manor Farm, they insisted on calling it the Manor Farm, they would not tolerate the name Animal Farm, were perpetually, so always again, fighting among themselves and were also rapidly starving to death. When time passed and the animals had evidently not starved to death, Frederick and Pilkington changed their tune and began to talk of the terrible wickedness that now flourished on Animal Farm. It was given out that the animals there practiced cannibalism, tortured one another with red-hot horseshoes, and had their females in common, which is kind of an old-fashioned way to say that they didn't practice monogamous marriage. They were a little bit more sexually free, which at the time of this novel's writing would have been, gasp, very inappropriate, but now today is not very much of a big deal. Well, this is what came of rebelling against the laws of nature, Frederick and Pilkington said. However, these stories were never fully believed. Rumors of a wonderful farm, where the human beings had been turned out and the animals managed their own affairs, continued to circulate in vague and distorted forms, and throughout that year, a wave of rebelliousness ran through the countryside. Bulls, which had always been tractable or had always been pretty nice, suddenly turned savage. Sheep broke down hedges. Remember the living fences that farmers build? So sheep broke down hedges and devoured the clover, the delicious grass on the other side. Cows kicked the pail over so that the milk would spill. Hunters refused their fences and shot their riders onto the other side. When they say hunters, they mean hunting horses. So instead of jumping over their fences, they refused them, which would mean they would stop really quickly and their riders would be pitched over onto the other side of the fence. Above all, the tune and even the words of Beasts of England were known everywhere. It had spread with astonishing speed. The human beings could not contain their rage when they heard this song, though they pretended to think it merely ridiculous. They could not understand, they said, how even animals could bring themselves to sing such contemptible rubbish, such ridiculous trash. Any animal caught singing it was given a flogging or a whooping on the spot, and yet the song was irrepressible. They couldn't keep it down. The blackbirds whistled it in the hedges, the pigeons cooed it in the elms. It got into the din or the sound of the smithies and the tune of the church bells. And when the human beings listened to it, they secretly trembled, maybe in fear, hearing in it a prophecy of their future doom. Early in October, when the corn was cut and stacked and some of it was already threshed, remember we learned that threshing is when they separate the cob from the actual kernels, which are the food part. The cob is just trash. So some of this corn was already threshed. A flight of pigeons came whirling through the air and alighted or set down in the yard of Animal Farm in the wildest excitement. Jones and all his men, with half a dozen others from Foxwood and Pinchfield, had entered the 5-barred gate and were coming up the cart track, the driveway that led to the farm. They were all carrying sticks except Jones, who was marching ahead with a gun in his hands. Obviously, they were going to attempt the recapture of the farm. Now pause here, don't move on yet, and take a moment to predict how this is going to turn out. We already heard way down at the beginning of the story the animals had been singing Beasts of England, and what interrupted them? Bam! The gunshot from Mr. Jones. And now we have Mr. Jones again with a gun. Do you think that Mr. Jones and his gun will interrupt the rebellion and therefore the farm in the same way that it interrupted their initial singing? Or will the animals win? This had long been expected, and all preparations had been made. Snowball, who had studied an old book of Julius Caesar's campaigns, which he had found in the farmhouse, was in charge of the defensive operations. He gave his orders quickly, and in a couple of minutes every animal was at his post. As the human beings approached the farm buildings, Snowball launched his first attack. All the pigeons, to the number of 35, so 35 pigeons, flew to and fro over the men's heads and muted upon them from mid-air. There's only one thing that pigeons can do while they're in the air and have it happen on the men's heads. I think you can imagine there. And while the men were dealing with this, so what the pigeons are muting onto their heads, and while the men were dealing with this, the geese, who had been hiding behind the hedge, rushed out and pecked viciously at the calves of their legs. However, this was only a light skirmishing maneuver intended to create a little disorder, and the men easily drove the geese off with their sticks. So this wasn't meant to chase the men away, just to give them a little taste of the fight. Snowball now launched his second line of attack. Muriel, Benjamin, and all the sheep, with Snowball at the head of them, rushed forward and prodded and butted the men from every side, while Benjamin turned around and lashed at them with his small hoofs. And this could be potentially very dangerous. Benjamin, as a donkey, he has very strong back legs. You can see in this picture that when donkeys fight, there can be some pretty serious injury. So Benjamin turned around and lashed at them with his small hoofs. But once again, the men, with their sticks and their hobnailed boots, their strong boots, were too strong for them. And suddenly, at a squeal from Snowball, which was the signal for retreat, all the animals turned and fled through the gateway into the yard. Now, of course, the men think they've won. The men gave a shout of triumph. They saw, as they imagined, their enemies in flight running away, and they rushed after them in disorder. This is just what Snowball had intended. As soon as they were well inside the yard, the 3 horses, the 3 cows, right, the biggest animals on the farm, and the rest of the pigs who had been lying in ambush in the cowshed suddenly emerged in the rear, cutting them off. Snowball now gave the signal for the charge. He himself dashed straight for Jones. Jones saw his coming, raised his gun, and fired. The pellets scored bloody streaks along Snowball's back, and a sheep dropped dead. Without halting for an instant, Snowball flung his 15 stone against Jones's legs. 15 stone is about 210 pounds. That's a lot of pig. Jones was hurled into a pile of dung, and his gun flew out of his hands. But the most terrifying spectacle of all was Boxer, rearing up on his hind legs and striking out with his great iron-shod hoofs like a stallion. Remember, horses wear heavy iron horseshoes. So not only is he a strong horse, but he's also got iron on his feet. His very first blow took a stable lad from Foxwood on the skull and stretched him lifeless in the mud. At the sight of this man on the ground, several men dropped their sticks and tried to run. Panic overtook them, and the next moment all the animals together were chasing them round and round the yard. They were gored, that means they were poked with horns, so maybe the cow poked them with their horns. Kicked, bitten, trampled on. There was not an animal on the farm that did not take vengeance or revenge on them after his own fashion. Even the cat suddenly leapt off a roof onto a cowman's shoulders and sank her claws in his neck, at which he yelled horribly. At a moment when the opening was clear, the men were glad enough to rush out of the yard and make a bolt for the main road. And so within 5 minutes of their invasion, they were in ignominious retreat by the same way as they had come, with a flock of geese hissing after them and pecking at their calves all the way. So these are grown men, and one of them even has a gun. And here they're chased away, they're retreating. This is an ignominious retreat. This means it's embarrassing. All the men were gone except one. Back in the yard, Boxer was pawing with his hoof at the stable lad who lay face down in the mud, trying to turn him over. The boy did not stir. He stayed still. "He is dead," said Boxer sorrowfully. "I had no intention of doing that. I forgot that I was wearing iron shoes. Who will believe that I did not do this on purpose?" "No sentimentality, comrade! No tears, no sadness," cried Snowball, from whose wounds the blood was still dripping. "War is war. The only good human being is a dead one." "I have no wish to take life, not even human life," repeated Boxer, and his eyes were full of tears. Now this would be a really good time to take a few notes on these characteristics. Boxer, he's full of tears over killing a man, even though his whole life has been controlled and dominated by men. He's really sad. But Snowball says war is war. The only good human is a dead one. Man, that's pretty vicious. So we had said earlier, oh, he's vivacious, not vicious. Well, maybe now he's vicious. "Where's Molly?" exclaimed somebody. Molly, in fact, was missing. For a moment there was great alarm. It was feared that the men might have harmed her in some way, or even carried her off with them. In the end, however, she was found hiding in her stall with her head buried among the hay in the manger. She had taken to flight. She had run off as soon as the gun went off. And when the others came back from looking for her, it was to find that the stable lad, who in fact was only stunned, had already recovered and made off. Whew. Can you imagine how Boxer's feeling? The boy that he thought he had killed and was so upset about, he hadn't died at all. The animals had now reassembled in the wildest excitement, each recounting or retelling his own exploits in the battle at the top of his voice. An impromptu and unplanned celebration of the victory was held immediately. The flag was run up, and Beast of England was sung a number of times. Then the sheep who had been killed was given a solemn funeral, a hawthorn bush being planted on her grave. At the graveside, Snowball made a little speech, emphasizing the need for all animals to be ready to die for Animal Farm if need be. The animals decided unanimously, all as one, to create a military decoration, Animal Hero First Class, which was conferred there and then on Snowball and Boxer. Now think about it. Snowball and Boxer, what did they do that was so special that they should get this very special medal? It consisted of a brass medal, and they were really some old horse brasses, which had been found in the harness room, and they would be worn on Sundays and holidays. There was also Animal Hero Second Class, which was conferred posthumously on the dead sheep, which was given after his death to the dead sheep. So let's take a look at those. So Boxer kicked the stable lad with horseshoes on and with all the strength of a horse. And for that, he and also Snowball were awarded these little brass medals that you see that decorated horses in the time that humans were in charge of Animal Farm. Oops. There was much discussion as to what the battle should be called. In the end, it was named the Battle of the Cowshed, since that was where the ambush had been sprung. Mr. Jones's gun had been found lying in the mud, and it was known that there was a supply of cartridges or the bullets that those kinds of gun take in the farmhouse. It was decided to set the gun up at the foot of the flagstaff like a piece of artillery and to fire it twice a year, once on October the 12th, the anniversary of the Battle of the Cowshed, and once on Midsummer Day, the anniversary of the rebellion. So to put a piece of artillery at the base of a flagstaff is really common, especially in the military, and artillery is just big guns, basically. So you'd fire those off to recognize special holidays. You see those fired off on the 4th of July. You also see those fired off during like military funerals. So they're going to fire their gun on October 12th to celebrate the anniversary of the Battle of the Cowshed, and on June 21st to commemorate the rebellion.